Hello, and welcome to the DSA Defense Block First Firearm Safety Teach-In. Today, we're going to be going over some basic firearm safety rules and introduction to firearms, so that way you or a loved one knows how to be safe when owning and operating a firearm. We'll also be going over some theory about why socialists like ourselves should or might want to consider owning and using a firearm. So guys, welcome to the Socialist Firearms training. We're going to be going over the rudimentary basics of how to safely hold, use, and store firearms, as well as some question and answer towards the end. But because, of course, this is a socialist organization, we're going to start off by reading some theory. I have 7 excerpts here from socialist writers and philosophers over the last 100 years discussing what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we're going to start with Karl Marx and his address to the Central Committee of the Communist League in 1850. The workers must be armed and organized. The whole proletariat must be armed at once with muskets, rifles, cannon, and ammunition, and the revival of the old-style citizens' militia directed against the workers must be opposed. Where the formation of this militia cannot be prevented, the workers must try to organize themselves independently as a proletarian guard, with elected leaders and with their own elected general staff. They must try to place themselves not under the orders of the state authority, but of the revolutionary local councils set up by the workers. Where the workers are employed by the state, they must arm and organize themselves into special corps with elected leaders or as part of the proletarian guard. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the proletariat must be frustrated by force if necessary. Vladimir Lenin, The Disarmament Slogan, 1916. Disarmament is the ideal of socialism. There will be no wars in socialist society, consequently, disarmament will be achieved. But whoever expects that socialism will be achieved without a social revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat is not a socialist. Dictatorship is state power based directly on violence, and in the 20th century, as in the age of civilization generally, violence means neither a fist nor a club, but troops. To put disarmament in the program is tantamount to making the general declaration, we are opposed to the use of arms. There is as little Marxism in this as there would be if we were to say, we oppose violence. An oppressed class which does not strive to learn to use arms, to acquire arms, only deserves to be treated like slaves. We cannot, unless we have become bourgeois pacifists or opportunists, forget that we are living in a class society from which there is no way out, nor can there be, save through the class struggle and the overthrow of the power of the ruling class. Mao Zedong, Conclusion to the 6th Plenary Session of the CCP's 6th Central Committee, 1938. It is very difficult for the laboring people who have been deceived and intimidated by the reactionary ruling classes for thousands of years to awaken to the importance of having guns in their own hands. Every communist must grab the truth. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Our principle is that the party commands the gun, and the gun must never be allowed to command the party. Yet, having guns, we can create party organizations, we can also create cadres, create schools, create culture, create mass movements. All things grow out of the barrel of a gun. Experience in the class struggle in the era of imperialism teaches us that it is only by the power of the gun that the working class and the laboring masses can defeat the armed bourgeoisie and the landlords. In this sense, we may say that only with guns can the whole world be transformed. We are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war, and in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun. Malcolm X, By Any Means Necessary, 1964. The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves, or we will continue to be a defenseless people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist mob. We assert that in those areas where the government is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of our people, that our people are within their rights to protect themselves by whatever means necessary. This is the thing you need to spread the word about among our people wherever you go. Never let them be brainwashed into thinking that whenever they take the steps to see that they're in a position to defend themselves, they're being unlawful. The only time you're being unlawful is when you break the law. It is lawful to have something to defend yourself. Why, I heard President Johnson either today or yesterday, I guess it was today, talking about how quick this country would go to war to defend itself. Why, what kind of fool do you look like, living in a country that'll go to war at the drop of a hat to defend itself? And here you've got to stand up in the face of vicious police dogs and blue-eyed crackers waiting for somebody to tell you what to do to defend yourself. Those days are over. They're gone. That's yesterday. The time for you and me to allow ourselves to be brutalized nonviolently is passé. Be nonviolent only with those who are nonviolent to you. And when you can bring me a nonviolent racist, bring me a nonviolent segregationist, then I'll get nonviolent. But don't teach me to be nonviolent until you teach some of those crackers to be nonviolent. You've never seen a nonviolent cracker. It's hard for a racist to be nonviolent. A man with a rifle or a club can only be stopped by a person who defends himself with a rifle or a club. That's equality. If you have a dog, I must have a dog. If you have a rifle, I must have a rifle. If you have a club, I must have a club. This is equality. If the United States government doesn't want you and me to get rifles, then take the rifles away from these racists. If they don't want you and me to use clubs, take the clubs away from the racists. If they don't want you and me to get violent, then stop the racists from being violent. Don't teach us nonviolent when those crackers are nonviolent. Those days are over. Brother Malcolm again, speech at Ford Auditorium, 1965. Right now, what's going on and around in Saigon and Hanoi and the Congo and elsewhere, they are violent when their interests are at stake. But of all that violence that they display on the international level, when you and I want just a little bit of freedom, we're supposed to be nonviolent. They're violent in Korea, they're violent in Germany, they're violent in the South Pacific, they're violent in Cuba, they're violent wherever they go. When it comes time for you and me to protect ourselves against lynchings, they tell us to be nonviolent. Brothers and sisters, if you and I would just realize that once we learn to talk the language that they understand, then they will get the point. You can't ever reach a man if you don't speak his language. If a man speaks a language of brute force, you can't come to him with peace. Good night, he'll break you in two, as he has been doing all along. If a man speaks French, you can't speak to him in German. If he speaks Swahili, you can't communicate with him in Chinese. You've been in this country long enough to know the language that the Klan speaks. They only know one language. And what you and I have to start doing in 1965 is start learning a new language. Learn the language that they understand. And when they come up on our doorstep to talk, we can talk. And they will get the point. There'll be a dialogue, there'll be some communication, and I'm quite certain there then will be understanding. It is a duty, it's your duty and my duty as human beings, it is our duty to our people to organize ourselves and let the government know that if they don't stop that Klan, we'll stop it ourselves. And then you'll see the government start doing something about it. But don't ever think that they're going to do it just on some kind of morality basis. No. So I don't believe in violence. That's why I want to stop it. And you can't stop it with love. So we only mean vigorous action in self-defense. And that vigorous action we feel we're justified in initiating by any means necessary. Now the press behind something like that, they call us racist and people who are violent in reverse. That's how they psycho you. They make you think that if you try to stop the Klan from lynching you, you're practicing violence in reverse. Well, if a criminal comes around your house with his gun, just because he's got a gun and he's robbing your house, and he's a robber, it doesn't make you a robber because you grab your gun and run him out. No, see, that's the man using some tricky logic on you. Huey Newton, In Defense of Self-Defense, 1967. We must organize and unite to combat by long resistance the brutal force used against us daily. The power structure depends on the use of force without retaliation. That is why they want the people unarmed. That is why they have made it a felony to teach guerrilla warfare. The racist dog oppressor fears the armed people. They fear most of all black people armed with weapons and the ideology of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And unarmed people are slaves or are subject to slavery at any given moment. When a mechanic wants to fix a broken-down car engine, he must have the necessary tools to do the job. When the people move for liberation, they must have the basic tool of liberation, the gun. One successful practitioner of the art and science of national liberation and self-defense put it this way: we are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war. And in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun. Brother Mao Zedong. Lastly, Donald Cox, Field Marshal Don Cox at the conference, 1967. Huey P. Newton says, any unarmed people are slaves, or are subject to slavery at any given moment. If the guns are taken out of the hands of the people and only the pigs have guns, then it's off to the concentration camps, the gas chambers, or whatever the fascists in America come up with. One of the democratic rights of the United States, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, gives the people the right to bear arms. However, there is a greater right, The right of human dignity that gives all men the right to defend themselves. Racist dog police must withdraw from the black community or face the wrath of the armed people. The Black Panther Party has a motto. It is a quote by Chairman Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist Party. We are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war. And in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to pick up the gun. So how do we do that safely? There are 4 basic tenets to gun safety. These are what we're referred to as core rules. The first, always assume every gun is loaded and ready to fire. Sometimes a gun is loaded, and if we believe it's not ready to fire, if the safety's on, etc., then we're going to be a little careless, or we might be prone to being careless. It's important to recognize that every gun is always loaded and ready to fire, pretty much right up until you personally have checked it yourself. Now, I'll demonstrate with this rifle here. I have in here a safety flag. So this goes into the action of the gun and down into, basically into the barrel, which confirms that the barrel is empty. And as you can see, we have designated over here as a safe direction that the action itself is empty. So there are no bullets in the gun. So just to clear that up first. So every gun is always loaded and ready to fire. If we have that principle down, pretty much everything else is going to be more or less a matter of redundancy. But safety is built on redundancy. So we want to make sure that we're not just being safe in one step, but in every step of the way. Firearms are wonderful tools for self-defense, for the liberation of the proletariat, or for more practical purposes like hunting and whatnot. But they're also an incredibly violent tool and very, very easy to have an accident. Now, your gun itself, chances are it's going to be a pretty reliable piece of equipment. And if you are being safe, the gun is going to be safe. But again, we don't take chances because unlike any other piece of machinery you're using, it takes only one slip up to critically injure yourself or someone else or do damage to your own personal property. So that's step number 1. This gun, as I said, we can see that it is not loaded and it is not ready to fire. I checked that for you. And again, that's what this flag is for. Number 2, never let the muzzle point to anything you are not willing to destroy. Now, some people will repeat this later on as you're not willing to shoot, but it's important to keep in mind the destructive power of a firearm. So we do not point a firearm anywhere we are not willing to have and see something destroyed. Now, again, we designated this over here as a safe area. And the way that my firearm right now is that it's always going to be pointed down at the ground. Generally speaking, anywhere you go, down is a safe direction. Now, sometimes you'll be in like a concrete building or something and maybe up is a safe direction. But you always want to make sure that if your firearm is not being discharged by you intentionally, it's going to be pointed in a safe direction. And again, down is generally the case. Now, this is pretty easy to mess up with a handgun. So I have a prop here. Because of how easy it is to point a handgun in an unsafe direction, I've opted for a fake firearm here. And the reason why I say that a handgun is more prone to negligent aiming, should we say, is that it goes with your hand. While a rifle here takes your whole upper body to maneuver, this takes only your hand. So if you're at the range and you're firing and you get called off the line, and then you turn towards whoever you're talking to, where have you pointed the gun? Now directly at someone else or in an unsafe direction. Or you might be at a gun store and pointing it in a safe direction when someone walks in front of you. If your gun isn't pointed in a safe direction now, you always have to manually make sure that you're doing that. You're now pointed the gun at someone. Again, especially this one's pretty light, so it's a little easier to forget. But if you're talking and gesturing, as most people do with their hands, I've just flagged every single person in this room. And if this were a real firearm, that would have been pretty much grounds for my dismissal right away. So we always keep our guns pointed in a safe direction. One of the ways that we keep this in mind is by a mental exercise in which we envision that a laser beam is coming out of the front of the gun at all times, and then anything you point at, kind of like a lightsaber, will be cut in the way. So right now I've held this down at the ground in a direction which no one's getting hurt. I'm going to load the firearm here with a laser sight. This is a bore sight, so this is a laser emitter that gets loaded right into the barrel of the gun. All right, so I'm going to load this one directly into the magazine as if it were a regular bullet. Now, I'll have you guys know that my magazine here does have dummy rounds in them. So this is a solid plastic artificial bullet. So it cannot be fired, it cannot cause harm to anyone unless I guess you threw it really hard. I'll put that in the magazine, and then we'll load in this laser point, as you can see over on the wall. We'll remove the flag and put it into battery. And now you can see my firearm here. It's a laser on the wall. So this is kind of how you want to imagine your gun doing at all times. And if it ever crosses into an unsafe direction, that every single place where that red light appears on the wall is something that I could theoretically perforate with the bullet. So we always got to keep in mind, whenever we're pointing a firearm in any direction, that is something that could potentially happen. Again, if you're doubling up on these safety rules, especially if you're being safe, it's not going to. So we'll remove the magazine and then eject the round. Now I will clear this again. Hold on. It's awkward to do without. There we go. Now the magazine has been removed and we've cleared the chamber and the chamber flag is back in. So that pretty much covers the step 2, which is always keep your firearm pointed in a safe direction. Additionally, always make sure you know what is a safe direction. I kind of covered this at the beginning, but if you're someplace like a range, ask. Downrange is always going to be your safe direction, but sometimes you're going to call the range cold or the range hot. And that means that if it's cold, people may be going down the range to adjust the targets, in which case it is no longer a safe direction to point your firearm. So know the rules of the range, know who you're with, make sure that everyone's following those, because a safe direction could easily become an unsafe direction if you're not careful. All right. So part number 3, keep your finger off the trigger and the safety on until you're ready to fire. So this is a pretty basic rule. Hopefully everybody understands this already. But this part here, the trigger, is of course what actually activates the firearm. And you want to make sure that nothing is ever in here. Some people call this your sacred space, and do not violate that until you're absolutely ready to do so. So your finger should always be on the trigger, and your safety should be on. Now, can't really show you this all that easily. My safety has been on this whole time. So until you're ready to fire the gun, do not flick that safety off. So again, if we were getting ready to fire, going down range, again in our safe direction here, at no point is my finger going to be on the trigger until I've decided that I'm ready to fire. So we'll aim, the cover off. So I'll be aiming down the field, and only when my sight is on and I'm ready to fire, my sight is on target, I will flick the safety off, and then I will fire the gun. Now again, we're not using any bullets, there is no ammunition at all. But again, never touch your trigger until you're ready to fire the gun. That's also going to help you with pointing the firearm in an unsafe direction. So if, like we were before with our handgun, God forbid you do make a mistake and you start flagging people as pointing a muzzle at someone when you're not supposed to, if your finger is off the trigger, you're probably going to be fine. I mean, you should be yelled at, and someone probably will, but that trigger is not going to be pulled, and thus, even if your firearm is loaded and ready to fire, as everyone will always assume it is, nothing's going to happen. All right, and then we come to our 4th and final core rule. Be sure of your target and what's beyond it, especially when firing something like an AR-15, which has higher powered rounds than your handgun, you always want to make sure that you know what you're shooting at and what's behind it. So if you are at a range and you're firing a high caliber round at a steel plate that's too close, you want to know that, oh, that's steel. My round could ricochet off that. Or if you're firing at, say, a wooden target, you want to know, okay, what's behind it? This is doubly important for self-defense because of what we call over-penetration. This is when your bullet goes too far through an object. So if you're in an indoor situation like we are here, and I had to fire at someone in our safe direction here, I should know not only what I'm shooting at, but this is in fact someone that I am required to shoot at this moment, but what's behind them? Is there another person behind them? Is there a bedroom behind them? Am I going to shoot through them and into my child's bedroom? Am I going to shoot through the wall into the neighbor's house? Are my neighbors home? Who is upstairs or downstairs? If you're in an apartment situation, is down even a safe direction? Is there someone living directly below you who, God forbid, your firearm is discharged, could be injured by that? Perhaps for you, if you live on the second floor of a 2-story apartment building, maybe up is the only safe direction because of who may or may not be downstairs. So we always want to make sure we know our target and what's behind it, so that way we don't shoot something or someone that we don't want to. All right? Now we're going to be moving on to what are our secondary rules. And these aren't necessary. Now, I should clarify, none of these firearm rules are necessarily in any order. It's not less important to be sure of your target than it is to not point your gun at something. These rules are pretty much all, those core rules are pretty much all the number one rule of gun safety. But for our secondary rules, these are again also not necessarily in order, but all of these are more or less less important than the core rules. And doubling up on these again, you're going to be safe. So the most important thing to do is observe as many of the rules as you can. So number one, keep your barrel clear of obstructions. Pretty obvious. You don't want to fire your gun if there's something in the barrel. So for our flag here, safety flag here, that is in the barrel, I don't want to try firing the gun with that in the barrel. Now, obviously, I'm going to be able to see it. I can't actually even put this into battery with the safety flag in there. It's part of the point. But let's say I pull it out and for whatever reason it's broken. Always make sure before you start firing that your barrel is clear of obstruction. Either do a visual inspection, use a brush, that kind of thing. But when doing so, again, follow the aforementioned rules. Keep your gun always pointed in a safe direction. So, pull that out. If I wanted to check to make sure that the gun is clear of obstruction, the barrel is clear of obstruction before I start firing, I'm not going to look down the barrel. What you would do for a gun like this, for example, is open it up and look down from the back if you can. Or use a cleaning rod, something like that, to clear it of obstruction. Do not look down the barrel of your gun. Again, it sounds really obvious, but in a momentary situation, you're firing, the gun doesn't sound quite right. You're like, oh, I think that might have been stuck in the barrel. And you look down. Don't do that. So you got to be safe when, of course, doing all this stuff. But that first rule, don't point your gun in an unsafe direction. Looking down the barrel of the gun is pointing the gun directly at your head. That is an unsafe direction, pretty obviously. So make sure that the barrel is clear of obstruction, and I'll put the safety flag back in, just so that way everyone can see at all times that we are, in fact, being safe. Bit awkward to do pointing it straight at the ground, but. All right. Next, know the proper use of your firearm. This is pretty obvious, but you know it's worth mentioning. Most of the time when you get a new firearm, you're going to have an instruction manual with it, or in my case, you're going to get a link to an instruction manual. Read it. If your gun didn't come with an instruction manual, maybe you're buying used, maybe you're buying like right off the rack or something, go download one. You can find all of them online pretty easily. You can easily find it on YouTube. Make sure you know what you're doing. The last thing you want to do is not know how your gun works and cause a problem or damage it, shoot something you're not supposed to, etc. Always make sure you know how your gun works. So this doesn't just go for the actual usage, because they're all pretty much the same point and shoot. But this goes for clearing. So clearing your firearm is making sure that there is no ammunition that can be fired. So that's what I did earlier when I pulled back the action and had the lever, or not the lever, the flag in there. That's clearing the gun. Make sure you know how to do that. It's generally going to be one of the first things you learn. And you're always going to want to do that every time someone hands you a firearm. So if you go to a gun store, the clerk, and you ask the clerk, hey, can I look at this firearm? What they're going to do every single time is they're going to clear it. If they don't shop it. They're going to clear it and they're going to hand it to you. And then you are going to also want to clear it. Now, if you don't know how, or if you don't know how to clear your firearm or a firearm someone else is handing to you, ask. Again, this is one of the safety things. You always want to make sure that somehow between the time that the person who just cleared it handed it to you, a bullet didn't fall out of the air and into that firearm. It's never going to happen, but it's not, I don't want to say it's not impossible because it is impossible, but it's better to be safe than sorry. I saw a video of a guy who, while he was reloading, one of his spent casings popped out of the top of his gun, landed on top of his new magazine, and went right back into the gun. So bizarre things could happen in which somehow a bullet falls into your gun. But it's just better to be safe, and it's good practice anyway. Every time you pick up your firearm, you're going to want to make sure it's cleared. That way you can take it anywhere. When I wrap this up and take it out to my car, it's going to be inevitably pointed in an unsafe direction. And if I know it's been cleared, locked, and safe, then it's okay to transport. Loading and unloading. This is pretty, again, like a lot of this is pretty obvious, but it needs to be said. So you need to know how to make sure you can load and unload your gun. So that's why I brought these plastic bullets. Make sure you know how to put them in your gun. Because if you put them in incorrectly or unsafely, you now have an unsafe bullet, maybe 2 inches from your hand. And how to unload it is just as important, because if you don't know how to unload your gun, then you're not going to be able to get the bullets out. So let's put this into battery now with the safety flag out. And again, these dummy rounds are in, so you can see exactly what we're talking about here. So we now have the gun in battery, and what we're going to do is unload it. So make sure you know how to do that. Remove the magazine. And here's why clearing is important. Right now, the bolt carrier group, the section here, is closed and locked into the front of the gun. What happened when I pressed that button, the flag flipped down and the bolt carrier group moved into battery, is it stripped one of the bullets out of the magazine and put it into the chamber. Which means, right now there is a, again, dummy round inside the firearm. So you need to know how to clear your gun, because if you take it out and it's not totally empty, you're going to have, chances are you're going to have a bullet inside the gun. If I were to put it off safe and fire, I would have just fired a bullet. And if I had believed that it was empty and didn't check, I would have just fired a bullet straight through the wall into the neighbor's house. So to clear this, it's pretty easy. You just basically pull back on it, chances are, and there we go. That's the bullet. So now we'll do that. We'll lock it open, so now you can see that there is no bullet in there. And what's doubly important is to visually check the barrel. Again, we're looking at it in this direction to make sure that there's nothing in there. And then again, I'll be using the safety flag to indicate to everyone else who sees that it is clear and there's no bullets in there. Otherwise, you could have a catastrophic accident pretty easily, even if you followed a bunch of the other safety rules. Ammunition, you want to make sure that you're always using the correct ammunition for your gun. Legally in the United States, it actually has to be stamped onto the actual barrel. So if you were to get in close with a flashlight and look through some of these holes, you'd be able to see it stamped in here. This is chambered in 5.56 or 223. Make sure you know exactly what your gun is chambered in and what the correct ammunition is. So this is going to be pretty prominent when it comes to an AR-15, because AR-15 takes two types of rounds, the 5.56 and the 2.23, both of which are almost exactly the same, but a 2.23 round cannot, or I'm sorry, a 5.56 round cannot be safely fired from a gun that is chambered in 2.23, even though the bullets are almost identical. So you always want to make sure that you know what bullets are safe for your gun, and make sure that you are using the correct ones. Another example of this is the very famous Garand, the battle rifle of the United States back in World War II. That is chambered in 30-06, but your modern 30-06 round is too overpressured to safely use. So you want to make sure that not only are you using the correct caliber ammunition, but you're using the correct pressure. Most of the time, it's going to be fine. Like you're almost never going to find a firearm round for your gun that isn't the correct pressure if it's the correct round for the firearm. But always make sure you're checking that. And that goes especially for homemade ammunition, because a lot of people do like to make their own bullets. I guess sometimes it's cheaper. From what I understand nowadays, not so much. But bullet is, of course, made up of kind of three parts. You have the brass casing here, and the actual bullet up here. So people will, and then of course the gunpowder in between, plus like the percussion cap and all that. So when people make their own ammunition, they'll put in their own powder and seal it up. So you want to make sure that if you are buying or using handmade ammunition, using it that it's safe and for the correct pressure and the correct round. The last thing you want to do is fire your rifle or your handgun and have it explode. It can happen. It does happen. And that explosion is going to be going on directly in your hands. And if you're using a rifle, directly against your face. So always make sure you're using the correct ammunition. And that the person who is hand making your ammunition, if so, knows what they're doing. Maintenance. Make sure you know how to clean your gun. Guns are like any other tool nowadays. Generally speaking, you don't really need to do all that much maintenance to it, depending on what it is. But if you don't keep it clean, you don't keep it safe, it's not going to be very usable. I, in fact, have a .50 caliber rifle at my house that was stored unsafely before I got it. It was stored loaded with black powder. So it's a black powder rifle that has powder down at the bottom, ramrod style, just like you've seen in old movies or movies set in old periods. So it was loaded, and then it was loaded again later on, so it had two charges in it. And the gunpowder is corrosive and ate away at the back of the barrel. So after I had it professionally unloaded, they drilled it all out. I was notified that if I ever loaded the gun and fired it, it would probably explode because of how much degradation had gone on inside. So if that gun were well maintained, if it were properly unloaded, that wouldn't have been a problem, and it'd be a totally usable firearm today. So chances are you're not using black powder rifles, so that specific thing isn't really going to be a big problem. But make sure you're maintaining your gun, you're cleaning it, and making sure that it's rust-free, free of obstructions, grease-free if needed, because grease buildup can cause a problem. And also your ammunition. So if you get a box of rounds, your ammunition is going to come in a cardboard box, probably, which of course absorbs water. If your ammunition gets wet or decays, it can become unsafe to use. So make sure that you're not only doing proper maintenance of your firearm, but also of your ammunition. Really, chances are that's more of a storage issue, but make sure you're maintaining your rifle or handgun or any other firearm, just like you would your KitchenAid, for example. Definitely clean your KitchenAid. The last thing you want to do is go to make pasta, and the pasta thing is all gunked up from the last time. It's a nightmare. Don't do it. And malfunctions. So make sure you know how to clear your malfunction. Now, most of the time, malfunctions are going to be cleared just by removing whatever bullets in there, unloading the gun and making it safe. You're really not going to have anything that breaks most of the time. But again, if your gun has been sitting around for a while, if you haven't been cleaning it, if the last person who owned it hasn't been cleaning it, if your bullets have been soaking in water, there's a chance you can get a malfunction. You'll probably be able to hear it or feel it, when you fire the gun, something doesn't feel quite right, doesn't sound quite right, you're going to be able to check. Make sure you know how to do that. I illustrated this earlier with removing or separating the gun, but make sure you know how to do that. It's not just part of the cleaning, but it's also part of the malfunction checking. So once you get your gun apart, you know your parts, know how to fix them, know how they should look, and if they're out of order. That's pretty much it. Make sure you know what you're doing, and if you have a malfunction that you personally can't fix, take it to someone who knows. Ask a friend, take it to a gunsmith, take it to someone who knows how to fix that for you. Again, the last thing you want to do is do it yourself and critically injure yourself or someone else. So we want to make sure that we're being safe and following those procedures there. Keep in mind that no unsafe gun can ever be handled safely, all right? So and I don't mean keeping this if the safety is off. I mean that if you have a malfunction, a maintenance issue, and the gun is now unsafe, that does not mean you can never handle it safely enough to make it safe. An example of a situation that could happen, it won't, but it could, is if you fire enough rounds through the gun all at once, it gets too hot and it starts cooking off rounds. That means that the bullets themselves are firing automatically because they're too hot. So you're not even touching the gun, the bullets are shooting out. There's nothing you could do to make that gun now safe to handle. The only thing you can do in that situation is remove the magazine, clear the gun, and then, well, actually don't clear the gun in that situation because the bullet currently chambered in the gun could be too hot and go off then on your table. So make sure that it's pointed in a safe direction, but for other malfunctions, clear it, empty it, keep it pointed in a safe direction, and get someone who can help you. Again, a lot of these steps kind of overlap, but the last thing you want to do is be unsafe with your own firearm or someone else's, because not only could you hurt someone, but they'll be really mad at you if you do that with someone else's gun. We already kind of covered this, but clear a firearm every time you're handed one, and make sure that it's clear. Perhaps like if I were to hand you this right now, it's already open and cleared. You could probably just do a visual check, but it's good practice to clear it anyway. But we already covered that. Safeties can fail. So there is no substitute, or safety is no substitute for any other safety rule. So right now my safety is on, and that should mean that the gun is safe. That doesn't mean I can point in an unsafe direction. Safeties are mechanical, like the rest of the gun, which means it has a potential to fail. And if it fails and you're not being safe with it, relying on the safety, you could have a catastrophic accident. You could fire a bullet through your neighbor's wall. You could fire a bullet into yourself. You could fire a bullet when there's something obstructing the chamber. I don't know. The safety is never something you can over-rely on. It's sort of like, again, like I mentioned with the cooking off rounds, the trigger discipline. If the gun is firing all on its own, keeping your finger off the trigger is not going to prevent it from firing. Same thing, your safety being on does not mean that the gun cannot be fired necessarily. Your safety is probably not going to break, but again, don't, like with my handgun here, if safety's on, it doesn't mean you can just point it at people. And if your safety does fail, if your gun does have a malfunction, and you're following all the other safety rules, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So if I keep my gun pointed in a safe direction here, and I think my safety's on, because that's another thing. Sometimes you'll remember putting the safety on, but it's not actually on. Or you'll forget which direction you flipped it. So if I'm going off sound, now the safety's off, and I don't bother to check, if I'm not careful, I could fire this gun. Now, obviously, of course, I can't. But if you're pointing it down range and your safety is off, and you accidentally fire the gun, it's going to be a lot safer to do it in a pointed and safe direction than if you have it pointed in an unsafe direction. So don't over-rely on safety features. Firearms should be unloaded whenever not in use. So this can be controversial for some personal defense weapons, especially your handgun. But really, you're going to want to keep your firearm unloaded. Keeps it safe. It means every time you go to retrieve it, you know whether or not you have to load it and how you have to handle it safely. It's good practice, and really, it's a good way to prevent an accident that could happen otherwise. And these next couple kind of all go in hand. Store your firearms and your ammunition safely. So you guys probably didn't see when I was getting set up here, but I don't have it on me. But I have a lock directly for this gun. So I have this gun locked whenever not in use. I like to use a cable lock here. There are plenty of different other types. So now this gun cannot be chambered. No rounds can be put in this gun. Can't even put a magazine in it. Nor can you take the gun apart in order to get around it as long as that lock is on. You're going to want to use a lock. I think most places in the country, you can get them for free from your local police department if you want to do that. There's like a Make America Safe or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but they're an initiative to make sure that everybody's guns are stored safely. That way kids and such can't get to them. So not only do I keep a cable lock on the gun itself, I keep stored in this bag, which I also keep padlocked. If you know anything about locks, it's pretty easy to bypass almost all of them, but it's going to prevent a thief or someone who's a little too interested for their own good from being able to access your gun. God forbid your 10-year-old thinks, oh, I want to go see my parents' gun. I want to go see my brother's gun or whatever. And they go and they pull it out. If you're storing it safely, either A, they're not going to be able to get to it. So use a safe, use a bag that's locked, keep it in a location that they can't access. Or, and because you want to, again, redundancy is safety, you want to keep the firearm itself locked. If, I don't have 10-year-olds in my house, but if a 10-year-old, somehow got access to this gun, they're not going to be able to hurt themselves with it because I have it stored safely. I also have ammunition stored safely. So whenever you're storing ammunition, don't just keep it, dry, like I said before, which is important, obviously for reasons we already clarified, but you also want it to be inaccessible. The last thing you want is for someone to somehow bypass your lock or have a gun of their own and take access to your ammunition when they shouldn't. So that's not just don't steal my ammo, but it's a real safety concern. If someone that you know we'll get to that one next, has destructive tendencies, you want to make sure especially. But it's good practice to just keep your ammunition also locked. And I think legally you have to have it stored separate. So you can't just pour your bullets into your bag necessarily. I know you definitely can't transport them in the same container. They have to be in separate containers. So I keep another padlock directly on my ammo crate or ammo case. Now again, people can still get past them. If someone's particularly dedicated, they're going to be able to bypass all of this. This is a good way to make sure that people who aren't dedicated don't get access to your firearm and your ammunition, because both of those together, as we already mentioned, can be really dangerous. And know who has or may have access to your firearms and plan accordingly. So again, if you have a 10-year-old in your house, you're going to want to store your gun very safely. Kids love guns. Few things are more attractive to a kid than a gun, maybe candy, depending on the kid. Kids love guns. All of their favorite characters on TV use guns. Everyone they've looked up to their whole life probably has or uses guns. They see it on television, cops using guns, soldiers using guns, superheroes using guns. They like guns. And guns are admittedly cool. So we want to make sure that, but like we covered at the beginning, guns are also a liability. So we want to make sure that any child or any person who has access to a gun, we restrict that access as much as possible if we don't want them getting it. Now, if you live entirely on your own, you might be able to or might feel comfortable having a lapse in safety or not being super redundant because you're the only one who has access to that firearm. But Know who may have access to your firearm is also important. Maybe your sister has children and she'll be bringing them over for the holidays. You might need to up your firearm safety. Or, like we just saw in the news, in which someone had their rifle stolen from their car. A thief may have access to your vehicle. If the only thing between your firearm and someone who wants it is your car's auto glass, that's not the safest way to store your firearm. So we always want to make sure not just who does have access to your gun, but who may have access to it, and plan accordingly. Now again, if you're using this or intending to use this for personal defense, and you want to wake up in the middle of the night and immediately have your gun ready, you can get special safes or such to accommodate that. But again, even in that case, store your ammunition separately, or at the very, very least, keep your magazine out of the gun. So that way, all you have to do is load it when you grab your handgun. It's going to be a lot. Those few seconds are probably not going to matter enough compared to the ability of someone else to take it and injure themselves or someone else. So store your gun safely, unloaded, locked, and with preparation for people who may have or gain access to your firearm. And lastly, whenever you're shooting, always wear protection. Ears and eyes, the last thing you want to do is go deaf from training with your firearm. And possibly even before that, you don't want to go blind by through negligence. So every single bullet ever fired from a gun is loud enough to damage your hearing. You will gain hearing damage from hearing a single gunshot, let alone however many you're going to be training with. So this magazine holds 30. If each one is going to guarantee hearing damage, I want to mitigate that as much as possible. So there are a couple ways to do that. Obviously, I'm not going to teach you the abstinence rule, but not shooting your gun is the best way to make sure that you don't get hurt. But because you're going to wear protection. So earplugs are actually surprisingly really good. I think these ones specifically are like 10 cents. They were, or maybe 6 cents. I don't know. I got, about 10 cents for the two of them. And you can just get bags of these for like 20 bucks, 200 for 20 bucks, online or at your local pharmacy or grocery store. Maybe not grocery store, but like Walmart or Target. And I think these ones specifically are rated for about 32 decibel noise reduction rating. That doesn't mean it actually reduces it by 32, but whatever. And it's really good. So a simple set of earplugs you can get at a concert or a particularly progressive Protestant church are going to actually be really effective, especially if you're using something like a handgun, which is probably going to use a lower pressure and thus ear safer round. But just like everything else, redundancy is really important. Doubly so because a lot of the concussive force and the noise from a firearm being discharged actually can get transmitted directly through your skull rather than through your ears. So you want to create some sort of, you want to accommodate for that. Doubly so if you're indoors, because it's going to be a lot louder than if you're outdoors. So when you're going shooting at the range, especially if you're indoors, especially if you're using a rifle, you're going to want to put these in and then use headphones on top of that. So a couple different types of headphones you can get. Make sure that they cover your ears, because if your headphones are not protecting your hearing adequately, then you just wasted however much money you spent on them. You can get them to just directly reduce noise, or like these ones, actually have a microphone that when it's turned on, it will amplify any sounds that I hear, but also muffle or cut out gunshots. You can look into those yourself. I'm not going to advertise any specific brands to you here, but that's an option. You can also get them Bluetooth enabled, so that way if you're sitting there plinking at the range, you can listen to music instead of gunshots. But it's always a good idea to have hearing protection. Don't cheap out. Again, like these are super, super cheap, but I advise you don't cheap out. Don't get like, I don't know, Five Below headphones. And make sure that they are rated for shooting at the range. Because if you get a set of headphones and really they're just designed to play music to you exclusively on the bus, it's not going to help protect you. So always make sure you're wearing the right hearing protection. I do personally recommend getting ones with some kind of microphone in them. That way you can hear each other. But again, it's more important to not hear the gunshots than it is to hear the person next to you. They can always tap you on the shoulder. Additionally, eye protection. Wow, things seem pretty loud now. Eye protection is really important. At the very, very least, like we saw with a couple of the demonstrations that I did, bullets and casings can fly out of the gun. And this has a deflection plate to stop it from going back into your face, but that doesn't mean they're not going to. They could, again, bounce off a wall next to you or something else. And if that happens, you don't want them going into your eyes. So the bare minimum, because you guys might have these at home, is something like this. Do not rely on your own personal glasses to do the trick. The bare minimum is something like this that can take that single hit before your eyes. But really, you want something like what I got here, which is impact resistant. You can get these pretty much anywhere. Make sure that if you have glasses, you get ones that fit over your eyes. But just a simple set of goggles that can protect your eyes. Again, impact resistance is what you want. Because it's not just going to worry about bullet casings, which are fine, I guess. But ricochets are also really important. Now, a ricochet, bullet hits something, bounces off. It will have already expended most of its energy. So if your ricochet does hit you in the head, it's not like getting shot in the head, but it's not unlike getting shot in the head. So the last thing you want is to have a bullet bounce off a steel plate, concrete wall, and go right into your eye. And your glasses aren't going to cut it. Something like these probably aren't going to cut it. And if they do, they might exactly once. So you want something to take that blow and survive, so that way you don't get it. So the last thing you also want is to get not just a bullet fragment in your eye, but also shrapnel from your own glasses cracking and blowing back into your face. And then the last section we have is some personal judgment. Do not handle firearms if you are depressed or if you're angry. It's a good way, both of those things cloud your judgment, and even if you're just going down to the range to fire off some rounds, you're not going to really get a lot out of that session if you're depressed or if you're angry. You have to approach it with a clear mind, because again, it's dangerous. And the last thing you want is to have an accident or cause someone else to have an accident or an injury because you're more interested in going out than in taking care of yourself. Do not handle firearms if you're prone to self-harm or suicidal ideation. Seems kind of obvious, but again, you got to know yourself and you have to make sure that you're being safe. And also know that for other people who you're with. The last thing you want to do is go out shooting with one of your friends who you don't know is planning for it to be, I guess if you didn't know, you wouldn't be taking them out. But the last thing you want is to hand the gun to someone who's going to be foolish with it or shoot themselves either intentionally or accidentally. And which is why we also follow all of the other rules. Make sure you're not pointing it at yourself, even as a joke. But if you have any struggles with self-harm or suicidal ideation, don't use a firearm. Now again, this is personal judgment. So if that's something that comes and goes, I'm not necessarily going to say, well, you should not own a firearm at all. Probably shouldn't. Definitely talk to your doctor or your therapist beforehand if that's something you're concerned about. But especially if you're not feeling great on the day that you're going out to the range, keep it locked up. If you need to, if you've been following safety so far and have safe storage, if you need to, hand the keys to someone you trust. Because we need all the comrades we can get. So don't make it too easy for yourself. Don't make it too easy for them. Lastly, don't handle firearms while under the influence. Again, this seems pretty obvious. If you're drinking, don't play with a gun. If you're high, don't play with a gun. But Something else is that your medication could affect that. If your medication says, do not operate heavy machinery while using this medication, don't use a gun. Talk to your doctor, again, if you need clarification. Like, hey, this medication I don't think it makes me feel or it clouds my judgment, but I want to make sure. Talk to a doctor before you go shooting. Because again, if you're drunk, if you're high, if you're taking medication that inhibits or impairs your judgment, you're not going to be safe. So safety is paramount. Again, that's why we're here. And one slip up could easily end the life of you or someone else. So we want to make sure that at all times we're being safe. And so you need to know yourself and have your own personal judgment. If you feel you're good enough to go to the range or to have a gun, that's great. If you don't get one. If you don't think you can be trusted to be safe with a gun, if you don't trust yourself to be safe with a gun, don't get one. Or if you do have one already, don't use it. Again, if you're practice safe storage practices and give access to someone you trust who can handle it safely for you or keep you from handling it unsafely. This is largely stuff. Sometimes your doctor can make these judgments for you, but a lot of this comes down to your own personal judgment. Know yourself. As Sun Tzu said, know yourself, you're going to be okay. That's a paraphrase. It's not exactly how it's written. But know yourself before you even get started. And make sure you're not, being careless, putting yourself in or someone else in harm's way. Very famously, the so-called American sniper, Chris Kyle, got at the firing range when he took a guy, one of his friends, who was not safe to be handling firearms, and brought him to the range. The gentleman, again, was not safe to be around firearms and shot Chris Kyle, the American sniper, and killed him. That's the last thing you want to happen to you. It's the last thing you want to do to someone else. So, make sure you're being safe. And there's no substitution for safety. If you're being sober and careless with a gun versus drunk and safe, which again is an oxymoron, you cannot be both drunk and safe with a firearm. But it's always better to practice safety ahead of everything else. Wanting a firearm is not enough of a good reason to have one. You have to be able to have one safely first. And that pretty much covers it on my list. Other things, get a first aid kit. So I have one strapped right to my rifle bag here. It's an IFAC, your individual first aid kit for treating gunshot wounds. It's really a good idea to either have one or know someone who has one when you go shooting. Even if you're doing everything safe, maybe someone else isn't. Or maybe you just got super unlucky. Someone didn't do their jobs along the way, and you end up with a bullet in you, and you need to be treated right away. Or, I don't know, maybe you got hit by a car walking in, and accidents happen. So make sure you plan for safety. Chances are, if you're going to like an indoor range or somewhere supervised, they're going to have first aid on hand, and they will have been doing everything right. But again, there's no substitute for redundancy. And I believe that just about covers it. Does anyone have any questions? Thanks for joining us for this DSA firearm safety teach-in. Today we talked about some basic firearm safety, how to operate a firearm safely and store it safely and possess a firearm safely. We also went over the theory behind why we as socialists want to or should consider carrying firearms. To learn more, get in contact with your local DSA in order to get prepared with some other teach-ins in your area. In the words of Chairman Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist Party, we are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war. But war can only be abolished through war, and in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun.